Hello and welcome back to Kernel of Truth's Miniature Issues. In the last few episodes I covered the construction of the walls and the first tower of Undercrag City, and now I'm moving on to the first of the buildings inside the city. You can see here on the left the constabulary with its ground floor of stone for a jail, and next to it the slightly smaller house of the captain of the city guard. So far these have been constructed out of an old cat food box, painted black on the inside. The first step in the detailing process is to add thin strips of balsa wood, in this case 2mm wide, to give that Tudor look that's so popular with fantasy buildings. I put on the main horizontal strips first, then the main vertical ones, outlining the shape of the building and the window frames. The ground floor of the constabulary was built when I was building the tower, which you can see here in an unfinished state. As I think I've mentioned before, I'm working on various parts of the city at the same time, so if you watch closely you'll see bits and pieces in the background developing. These will all be covered in their own episodes. Having done the main verticals, I'm starting to add detailing. My aim here is to just reduce the size of large areas of empty wall. This is to give a better sense of scale. If you actually calculated the size of some of these areas, they'd be absolutely enormous. Again, I'm not too worried about being very precise. It's all about the look of the thing. But there is a point at which it becomes ridiculous. This is a very simple process and quite enjoyable. I should add here that the plaster you can see on my finger is absolutely definitely nothing to do with poor knife technique. I'm a professional after all. Just like with the tower, I'm hand drawing planks into a piece of balsa to put behind the door frame as a door. I'm making this much bigger than the door itself, just gives me more to glue into the model. Again, the glue goes onto the cardboard, not the balsa wood. I don't want to obscure the wood grain. Bit fiddly here, but I'm trying to get it to look nice and straight. Just like with the tower, I'm leaving a little gap at the bottom of the door so that when the LEDs inside the model are on, light escapes through it. Of course, models are three-dimensional, so it's no good just focusing on the front of the building. I'm adding some floor joists, whose ends will be visible if nothing else once the model is glued into the city itself. This all just adds depth and character. Now a bit of decorative detail. Tudor buildings are full of this sort of thing. I'm just putting some simple diagonal timbers in place, but this kind of thing is a great opportunity to go wild if you want to. I might do with some of the more extravagant buildings later on as Undercrag develops. Here I'm adding some very small pieces just in between these vertical timbers. Again, as a final detail really, for the sake of completion. It all helps bring the thing to the right kind of scale. I decided the windows were too tall. This should be a fairly simple building, and therefore should have relatively small windows in my opinion. So I added window sills. These are the same 2mm strips of balsa just laid flat. Here we are testing it against the tower. You can see I've left some detail out of the balsa wood where the stairs come down. Now I'm into the painting stage. The model gets a grey undercoat all over the timber framing. I use grey instead of white or black because if I'm working with white materials, sometimes it's hard to see where I've undercoated and where I haven't. And black often gives a very heavy result that I don't particularly want. After the grey, I'm painting the model completely with brown ink. This will add warmth and shadow to the timbers and the panelling. Next, a very generous overbrushing of a pale yellow. Here I'm trying to get into all of the panels. I'm not worried about the woodwork. This will pick out the grain quite nicely later on, as you'll see. But I want the panels to be an off-white colour. The brown ink already on there is giving it some outlining and some shade. And the yellow brightens things up. It's halfway towards the final white finish. None of this needs to be uniform. The buildings of Undercrag are quite dirty, old, worn out. Here goes with the white. Combination of the brown, the yellow and then the white gives quite a warm finish rather than a very pale cold finish. And finally, I'm picking out all of the timber, including the door, with the same brown ink as before. While I'm waiting for the brown ink to dry, I'm creating the windows. These buildings are going to have LEDs inside them, and I don't want to be able to clearly see them from outside. So I've taken acetate sheeting and painted it on both sides with clear Mod Podge to give a very irregular glass. This will obscure whatever you can see through it. Cutting it into small pieces, I just glue it in behind the window frames. Any excess PVA will also dry clear and just add to the obscuring effect of the glass. You can see I've also painted the ground floor of the constabulary and the chimneys, although they haven't yet had their ink washes. And now they have. The same black, green and yellow to match the tower, which I covered in episode 3. Now I'm moving on to the roof. I tried some thick card, but on reflection this was way too straight and clean. I decided I needed a more wonky effect. A friend of mine worked on the buildings for Lake Town in the Hobbit movie, and he described to me how they made the roofs sag over their roof timbers. I decided to try and achieve something similar. In order to do this, I'm creating some basic roof timber shapes from card, but leaving plenty cut out because I need the light from the LEDs to spread inside the buildings. Once these are in place, liberally coating them with glue, including the outside edges of the building, and I'll then glue paper over the top, heavy paper from an artist's sketchbook. You can see the wiring is coming in one side of the building and out of the other. The intention was to bring power into the building and then continue it through to the next piece of the city. As it happened, I actually approached it differently in the end. I'm roughly shaping the paper to fit around the chimney. It doesn't need to be precise at all. This is all going to be covered with roof tiles. And now just a liberal coating of water. The wet paper will sag where it's not in contact with the roof beams, and you can see it's starting to take the shape of them here. This will then translate through the lines of tiles I'm going to glue on and give me a nice wonky appearance. Here's a sheet from a cat food box, which I've penciled tiles into. These are 3mm wide, 6mm long. For reference, here's my water mill I built some weeks ago, to the same scale. And this is what I'm aiming for. I'll cut these into single strips, and then chop, chop, chop. Hundreds of them. A generous line of glue at the bottom edge of the roof, and start applying your tiles. There are various different ways to model tile roofs, and I've tried a few of them, but for me the best way is simply to put them on one at a time. I'm not going for precision, I'm going for age. For the second row of tiles, the glue goes on the roof and the tiles below them, and so on, working your way up the roof. Starting to look pretty good. Sometimes the tiles get out of sequence and line up too cleanly along the same edge, so I put in half tiles or lay them in at odd angles or whatever, and then continue as before. Tiles are all on, and now the same painting technique. A grey undercoat, a brown ink wash. When the brown's dry, the same yellow and then the same white as I used on the walls. The chimney pots are made from round plastic tubing. There you go. I decided that brush was way too small. Switch to a bigger one. Much better. I don't want uniformity here, patchy is good. Age and weathering and so on. All the things I've touched on numerous times already. No apologies for my dressing gown in shot there either. It was 5:30 in the morning when I did this. Here goes the white. The ridge tiles were made from brass foil folded over. I haven't shown this here, but I'll show it in a later video. The white is just highlighting the edges of the tiles. I'm not too worried about getting in deep. And now the magic touch. This is rust ink. Just generously applied to the whole roof. And the chimney pots. And here it is side by side with the first tower. Same technique as with the tower for the door hardware. Black cardboard, a little bit of silver paint, and then a tiny touch of rust ink to take the shine off. Really simple, really quick. I'm joining these three together on a sheet of paper before I add them to the city itself. This is so that I can hide any joins with sand just like I did on the city walls and the tower. It's just a bit easier this way. There we are in place, with the lighting going. Needless to say, I was very happy with this result. As usual, I really hope you've enjoyed this video. There will be more very soon. If you haven't seen the previous ones, please go back and have a look. Like us, subscribe us, follow us on Instagram, all that jazz. And I hope to see you again very soon. Bye for now.